Hey, Costanza, let me ask you something. Is it February or February? Because I prefer Uary. And what is this rule?
That's a wrap on February. February's over. We're already two months into 2025, which is crazy. Time flies. A lot of really great stuff came out this month. The new White Lotus, new Yellowjackets. So let's dive in. Alien Romulus. I rewatched Alien Romulus. It came to Disney Plus finally, months and months later, and I still really enjoy it. It's really great atmosphere, and the acting is great. Kaylee Spaney is great, and David Johnson is fantastic as these kind of two sides of the same coin, dual performance with different. His demeanor and his personality completely changes depending on what software is running in his android body, and Isabella Merced, I thought, did a great job of conveying the fear, a lot like Veronica Cartwright in the original did. And nothing will quite compare to watching it the first time, opening day, big screen, and thinking, okay, the movie's over, and then boom, the offspring fucking shows up. That was such a great reveal. And that, it's not as effective, obviously, when you know it's coming, but I still love that whole sequence, and the design of the creature's fantastic. And I'm glad that there's a sequel in development, and it's confirmed it's not going to be some standalone thing. It's going to continue the story of Rain and Andy, because I love those characters now, and I want to see where they go next. What happens when they get to Yavaga? What if that's been infested with xenomorphs? What if David is there doing his experiments? Speed. I've seen Speed probably 3 or 4 times now, and I'm always blown away by how fucking great it is. I always remember it that it's a fun action movie. It's a lot of fun, and Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock are great in it and have great chemistry. And but on paper, it sounds so ridiculous. It's Die Hard on a bus, and if the bus drops below 50 miles an hour, it will explode. But then you actually sit down and watch it, and you realize this is a masterpiece. Of all the Die Hard clones, this is easily the best one. This is almost as great as Die Hard, because Keanu Reeves' character isn't just a rip-off of John McClane. He's his own thing. Whereas John McClane's kind of a renegade, and that's great, and I love that character too. Jack Traven is kind of by the book, but he's still really cool. And Dennis Hopper is great as the villain. He's so sadistic and just really throws himself into the role. And Sandra Bullock, I think this was the movie that introduced the world to Sandra Bullock and made everyone fall in love with her and turned her into a movie star. And she's delightful. She's a delightful foil for Keanu, where he's so razor focused on let's get the job done. She's the every woman. She's the audience surrogate who's been thrust into this position of having to drive the bus, through rush hour traffic at 50 miles an hour, herring it round corners, and it's just so much fun. It's such a simplistic premise, but that's the genius of it. They've got to keep the bus over 50 miles an hour. The roads are full of cars, people are crossing the road and they can't stop and they can't even slow down, and there's some silly parts, like when the bus jumps an unfinished bridge is just ridiculous. The bus somehow does some sort of leap, it gets to the edge, and where it would in real life just fall off, it goes boom, and it goes flying. It's suddenly does it's suddenly at a 45 degree angle goes flying into the air. That's absurd. But outside of that one sequence and a couple of the little things, you know what the stakes are, you know what's going to happen if they slow the bus down, and you just go along for the ride, Star Wars, the original Star Wars, A New Hope. I just felt compelled to rewatch it. I hadn't seen it, I think, probably in about a year, maybe a bit more than a year. It was a couple of Christmases ago. They showed it on the big screen, and me and my dad went down and watched it. And it was a packed house, and it was so much fun. But it's still just as much fun watching it at home. It's still, you don't have the benefit of having a huge audience around, and it's projected onto a humongous screen, and you're in the dark, and it's cool. But it's just such a romp, and the cast are incredible. They're there's a reason they've all become, ridiculously iconic characters, and the chemistry of Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher is just palpable from the first moment they're all on screen together during the escape sequence on the Death Star. This movie has been discussed to death, so I don't need to keep going on, but it's so great. Infinity Pool. It's a weird fucking movie. Really, really weird, really gruesome, really just out there. It's Brandon Cronenberg, son of David Cronenberg, and he kind of proves with this movie he has his dad's flair for really disturbing imagery and really disturbing storytelling. And it's a great premise. I didn't actually really know anything about it going in, but it's this interesting look at the excesses of the elite, the excessive lifestyle of the 1%, where Alexander Skarsgård is in this, I think, fictional foreign country at this exotic resort, and the tourists aren't supposed to leave the resort, but he leaves with some friends, one of them played by Mia Goth. and accidentally hits a guy with his car on the way back, and Mia Goth says the police here are corrupt and you'll never get to go home if we report this, so let's just go back to the resort. And they go back to the resort, and then the police show up the next morning and arrest him. And they have this weird law there where if you kill someone, like, heinous crimes are punishable by death, and if you've killed someone, then that person's son is entitled to kill you, like, legally, and it's like a public execution. But there's a special rule for tourists where you can have yourself cloned, and they'll kill the clone instead, and you have to watch your own clone get killed. And the clone has all the memories of the original version, so that he thinks he's the original version being killed for his crime. And Alexander Skarsgård's wife is horrified when they have to sit and watch him get stabbed to death by a little boy. But Alexander Skarsgård is kind of like titillated by it. He's kind of thrilled by it. And so the wife goes home, and he kind of claims that the police have his passport and he can't go home. But really, he just hid his passport because he wants to stay there and hang out with Mia Goth and kill people and break into people's homes and have orgies. And then the next morning go and watch himself get killed for it. And it's great. I mean, it's really, really bizarre, but it's fantastic. And it's gripping and mesmerizing, but also really, really unsettling. And like, you want to look away, but you can't look away. And, and it's this great kind of satirical commentary on the excesses of the 1% and at the expense of the 99% having to suffer so they can live this life of luxury and have fun and exploit people. It had lots of twists and turns, so I thought it was fantastic. It happened one night. It's like the original rom-com, but back then in the 30s they called them screwball comedies, like this and His Girl Friday, and I love those old movies. I love snappy repartee. I love like witty dialogue, and it's kind of what these movies are defined by. And It Happened One Night is great. It's this wealthy heiress runs off because her dad doesn't want her to be with her husband, who she kind of eloped with, and while she's trying to get back to the husband, and the dad is trying to track her down, she meets Clark Gable, who's like a news reporter. It's a bit like Roman Holiday, where it's like the exchange is, like, what he gets out of it is the scoop. He needs a big scoop, he needs a good story, and this is it. Heiress runs away, so he's gonna like reunite her with her husband. But then along the way, over the course of this journey, they fall in love. And it's raunchy. It's like Hays Code raunchy. It's like raunchy within the confines of the Hays Code, where she pulls up her skirt and shows her knee to get a ride, and that's like the equivalent of pulling up your top and showing your breasts today in the very conservative society of the 1930s. It's a lot of fun, and they have great chemistry, and it's just, it's a lot like His Girl Friday, where it doesn't feel like it came out 80 years ago. It feels like it could have been made, apart from the societal things, the cultural things that are different. It has a very modern clip and a very modern pace. It's not slow and dull and dry like a lot of old movies. Breaking Bad. I started rewatching Breaking Bad last month and finished this month. And it's just an absolutely incredible show, like perfect from start to finish, because it kind of is the best of both worlds, where it's really, really intense and action-packed and thrilling, but also like realistic, or as realistic as it can be when it's playing with these pulpy tropes. Like Hank gets a call and it's like 2 men are coming to kill you, and these two hitmen approach him and attack him, and that's like a very pulpy scenario that you would see in like any kind of classic crime thriller. But then after he gets shot 3 or 4 times, he's in hospital in surgery and you can't even see him for a couple of episodes, and then he's in hospital and he can't leave, he's bedridden, and then he goes back home and he's bedridden, and he starts going to physiotherapy, and he's very, very slowly regaining the ability to walk. And so after this like 2-minute action scene where he gets shot a couple of times, he's recovering from those wounds for basically the entire rest of the series. He's recovering from it for like the next 2 or 3 seasons. And in most shows, they'd be back on their feet in 1 episode, or immediately in most cases. And it's one of the absolute greatest finales, where they had loads of these like flash forward teasers throughout the final season that, there was going to be a year time jump. Walt was going to have a full head of hair and a thick beard, and he was going to come back to New Mexico, and, he was going to have been caught because Heisenberg was spray painted all over his house. His house has been condemned and abandoned, and he buys a giant machine gun, and, all these things that are building up to what will be an amazing finale, and then it is an amazing finale. All those things come together and make total sense. And it's the perfect ending, where it's bittersweet because he got to go out on his own terms and he got to settle all his old scores. But he also, spoiler alert, he also died, but then as he's dying, he goes and he's like fondly remembers his time making meth. He's like walking around a meth lab, caressing the boiling tubes and things. You know, and I love his final scene with Skylar where he starts, you think he's about to give a whole nother speech about, it was all for my family, all these horrible things I did, it was all for you guys. And he says, it wasn't for you, that's a lie I've been telling myself. It was for me, because I liked being good at something, I liked being the best at something and making a lot of money doing it. Which is very human and very relatable, especially for like, considering the life he was living when we first met him. So it's just completely deserving of its reputation as one of the greatest TV shows ever made, and just a masterpiece. Nightbitch. I heard about this movie a few months ago and it sounded like batshit insane, it's Amy Adams is this kind of frustrated mother, her husband isn't as supportive as she'd like him to be, and her son is like a bit of a handful, and she never gets a second to herself, everything is for her husband or for her son, or, and this frustration manifests itself as she transforms into a dog. She's like running out into the street at night with other dogs, and she brings back dead birds to the house, and she grows extra nipples. I thought that sounded amazing. It was sounded like a really, really fun, crazy horror film. But then I watched it, and it's like nowhere near as crazy as the premise makes it sound. You would think it would be like the wildest film ever made. Amy Adams turns into a dog, and it just doesn't push it as far as you'd like it to. And it even as it deals with the themes of like motherhood and of the frustrations of motherhood and the depression and losing individuality and stuff, that's all just spelled out in dialogue. That's all just Amy Adams says it all out loud or says it in voiceover narration. And it's telling instead of showing, and the horror stuff, the turning into a dog stuff, just isn't. It's so tame, it's if you'll pardon the pun, it's very domesticated. So it's Amy Adams is amazing, but it was a letdown. And I love that director, Mariel Heller, I think her name is. She's done some great movies. She did the movie where Tom Hanks plays Mr. Rogers. I loved that. And she did Can You Ever Forgive Me, where Melissa McCarthy plays like a forger. And those were amazing movies, but this just wasn't it. And I think I just don't think she's cut out for horror. I think she should stick to just dramas about human beings. Because when you try and add in a horror element like turning into a dog, I don't think she has the sensibility for it. Liar, liar. This is one of my childhood favorites, and it's just purely fun for the opportunity to just see Jim Carrey do his thing. His people say he's like a rubbery-faced over-actor, as if that's like an insult. But for a movie like Liar, Liar, or Bruce Almighty, or The Grinch, or what have you, that's perfect. That's that's what those films need. It makes those films. And it just this premise of an unscrupulous lawyer who lies constantly. He lies to his ex-wife about why he can't come around and see his son. He lies to women he's sleeping with about other women he's sleeping with, and he lies to his clients about whether he's going to be able to get them off, and he lies in court. He lies to make a case for his clients who are guilty, but he's trying to make it look like they're innocent. He almost never ever tells the truth, and for 24 hours he can't lie because of his kid's birthday wish. And he loses his mind, and it's sort of just fun to watch Jim Carrey play that meltdown. A Real Pain. I adored A Real Pain when I watched it last month, and they were still showing it at the cinema. I had a couple of hours free. I went down and watched it again, and enjoyed it just as much the second time. And again, last month I was saying no one else in the audience was laughing, even though I found the film hilarious and I was laughing through the whole thing. Same thing happened again, no one was laughing except me. But this odd couple dynamic of Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin, I could watch it all day. If Jesse Eisenberg released a 24-hour cut where all the gaps in between are just filled with them walking around Poland, bickering and bantering, I'd gladly watch it. They're like the ultimate mismatched duo. It's like yin and yang, and their chemistry is just incredible. So I am even more resolute now. That's going to probably be on my top 10 at the end of the year, even though the year just started. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. This new show on Disney Plus, animated series about, I think it was originally conceived that it would be the origin of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but then the creative team were kind of that confines us to the timeline of the MCU and exactly what happened, that it would be inevitable that Tony Stark would come in and mentor him, and he would go to Berlin for the fight over the Sokovia Accords, and then he would join the Avengers, and his journey was already mapped out. Whereas if they do it in a what-if multiverse scenario, they have a lot more freedom. So they give him, like, it's still Marissa Tomei's Aunt May, although she's not played by Marissa Tomei, but the voice acting is just a spot-on impression. And they still live in that same little apartment in Queens. But other than that, everything's different. His friendship circle is different. Instead of being, you know, he doesn't get an internship with Tony Stark, he gets an internship with Norman Osborn, and that drives him down a much darker path. Where Norman Osborn doesn't say, with great power comes great responsibility, he says, with great power comes great respect, you know? And that just that one little changed word takes him down a bit of a darker path. I thought it was great. I loved it. I mean, the first couple of episodes, you know, didn't hook me instantly. And there's a lot of that kind of awkward dialogue that's, you know, the MCU has made it like the standard, and it's just gotten so far removed from how people actually talk, where people just, like, you know, they blurt something awkward out and then try and play it off, and it's just not really how real conversations go. But, you know, once it's settled into it, and they had Lonnie, aka Tombstone, had a very interesting arc in a B story where he, you know, is to save his little brother, he joins this gang, and that's it, sets him on the path to become Tombstone, but he has more of a conscience, and I really enjoyed it. I'm glad they're already developing future seasons, because I love this show, and I'm excited to see more. And it's the end of season 1, you know, sets up some interesting mysteries for the next seasons to follow, but also it's like, this season gets him from, he's been bitten by a radioactive spider, to he's Spider-Man, you know, and it takes a long time to get there, and they could flesh it out much more, like Batman Begins, where it's not just, let's get through the origin story in half an hour and then just get into the action, which I mean, I like that too, because origin stories generally are quite boring, but this was an interesting new take on it, the way that Harry and Norman Osborn are in on the origin journey. And there's a lot of different twists that aren't usually in the traditional Spidey origin story, but he's still Spidey, you know, he's still Peter Parker. A League of Their Own. I hadn't seen this movie in a few years, and popped up on, I think, Prime, so I stuck it on. And it's just so good. Like, every time I watch it, I'm reminded, like Speed, I'm reminded of how incredible it is. You know, where it was such a great premise. I mean, it's a real life thing that when all the men, the, you know, fit, athletic, young men, American men, were sent off to fight at war, they assembled an all-female baseball league so they could keep playing baseball, and America's favorite pastime would survive through the war. But they, from what I can tell, the movie deviates drastically from the real life story. They took that setup and just created their own ensemble of characters and had their own fun with it. And but what they did was such a great story and such great characters, where they've got this washed up, hard drinking baseball legend, but now a has-been, played so hilariously by Tom Hanks. And Gina Davis is so great as the kind of, you know, the every woman, the kind of who leads the ensemble, and that frees up the rest of the cast to kind of like just be these big personalities, these colorful characters. You know, Rosie O'Donnell is really funny in it, and there's a lot of people criticize Madonna's acting in general, but also specifically in this. But I think Madonna's great in this. You know, I thought she had good comedic timing, and there's just so many great comedic ideas in it, like that one of the baseball players is like a single mom who, she doesn't have anyone to look after her kid, so she brings the kid along, and the kid is just a menace and a nightmare for everyone. Just so funny, and so just warm and lovable, and just a really sweet movie. And, you know, people always talk about, like, you know, the success of Bridesmaids proved that, like, you know, women are funny and can lead a comedy, but League of Their Own was like 20 years earlier than that, and it's a classic. And 9 to 5 was even earlier than that. Igby Goes Down. This was one of Kieran Culkin's early breakout roles, and I'd loved him so much in A Real Pain, and I loved him in Succession, and you know, that kind of on-screen persona he's kind of carved out for himself, where he's like very snarky and sardonic, but also very vulnerable and human deep down. It kind of started off with Igby Goes Down, with this character of Igby, who, you know, is just surrounded by chaos. His dad is schizophrenic, and his mom is a pill popper, and, you know, really cruel and mean to him, and he gets sent off to military school, where he gets the shit beaten out of him, and he runs away to kind of like squat in his uncle's art studio, or his godfather's art studio, and ends up like enabling a heroin addict. And it's just all these really dark scenarios that Kieran Culkin makes them hilarious. And you can see like the early seeds of Roman Roy or of Benji in A Real Pain in his performance as Igby, which is great. And the supporting cast is fantastic too. Like Claire Danes plays his love interest, Jeff Goldblum is his godfather, Susan Sarandon is his mom. A really, really great cast, and a really, really kind of just unique darkly comedic perspective. It's the same director as 17 again, which is crazy to me. Like, those two films, the style and tone of those movies could not be further apart. The Office, rewatched the original Office, the British version, Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, which I had not seen in a few years. And I rewatched the American version all the time because there's so many more episodes of that to get lost in. Whereas this is like a tight 12 episodes and then a Christmas special and then they were done. And it's just from beginning to end, it's perfect. The first episode is hilarious and finds its feet and its characters instantly. And the last episode, wraps up the story and wasn't even close to having gone on too long. Whereas the American version doesn't really find its feet until like season 3, and it has a really great finale, but before the finale there's about 70 shitty episodes before they finally called it quits because they had lost Steve Carell, But the original, I can see like why some people prefer the American one, because it's the original is sometimes gets so cringeworthy that it's like painful to watch, which I actually never really got. Like, I get uncomfortable watching uncomfortable things, but when it's for comedic purposes, when it's cringe humor, I love it. I love that stuff. I think because my own real life is so awkward and uncomfortable. I can laugh. I like laughing at other people from the safety of my side of the screen when it's the awkward, uncomfortable, embarrassing thing is happening to them and not me. It's happening to David Brent and not me. But it's just like that performance of Rick Gervais as David Brent is so accurate to like the annoying, irritating boss who thinks he's your best friend, and the guy who thinks he's so much funnier than he actually is. But it's also vulnerable, and it's also like he's a deeply complex character, because you hate him, and you would hate him if you knew him in real life, but you can't help but feel sorry for him as well. And for all the things you hate about him, for all his blind spots, he's not really a bad person at his core. He just is such an interesting character, and just a fantastic series. It's one of the few shows that is like perfect beginning to end, and it's just a masterpiece. You're Cordially Invited. This is the movie Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon. Like Reese Witherspoon's sister's wedding and Will Ferrell's daughter's wedding have been double booked at the same venue. And so they're like trying to sabotage each other's weddings as they try and take place concurrently. And they're hilarious. Reese Witherspoon and Will Ferrell hilarious, but the director, Nicholas Stoller, is the guy who did Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and I would expect such a tighter and more well-balanced comedy from him, because it feels like this one doesn't really know what it wants to be. It presents as, a classy wedding comedy, like sophisticated, and wants to be like relatable and whatever, real. But Will Ferrell is this agent of chaos who keeps just bringing absurdity crashing into this supposedly what is supposed to be a sophisticated little comedy. And I mean, that was the best parts of the film, like that it's like Nicholas Stoller's trying to make this just small, relatable, real movie, and Will Ferrell keeps infecting it with ridiculousness. Like, he'll wrestle a crocodile into Reese Witherspoon's room and then spoon with it on her bed while he waits for it to come back. Like, that's not real or relatable at all, but it's funny, and the way Will Ferrell plays it is so funny. And so it's kind of like two movies. It's like 4 Weddings and a Funeral that Reese Witherspoon and Nicholas Stoller are trying to make, and then, but for the grace of Will Ferrell, he keeps coming in to make it Anchorman. And but I much preferred the movie he was making it. I much preferred the chaotic, crazy movie he was making it. The Straight Story. After David Lynch passed away, this was one of his only films I hadn't seen. And it's also the least Lynchian of his movies. Some people will point to The Elephant Man because it's this, very sobering, very classical drama. But even that deals with themes of monstrosity and, Kafka-esque, being an outsider from society stuff. But The Straight Story really is nothing like Lynch ever did, apart from the fact that it deals very heavily with like Americana. But it's this true story of this old guy who couldn't drive a car, so he drove his riding lawnmower across the entire country to go and visit his brother after his brother had had a stroke, because he'd had a falling out with his brother about 10 years earlier, and he wanted to reconcile with him before it was too late. And it's just such a beautiful, human, relatable thing. Like, anyone can relate to that. Everyone has regrets, and everyone has relationships they want to rekindle, and everyone is dealing with mortality and aging, and facing death, and facing if I die tomorrow, there will be things that will have gone unsaid or whatever. And it's a really touching film, because along his journey there's a lot of beautiful shots of rural America as he's just riding across on his lawnmower. But along the way he meets a lot of people, and he's talking to them, and he's reflecting on why is he going to see his brother, and you start to see why they fell out in the first place and why he wants to make up with him. And it digs so much into aging and into, like, when you're looking back on your life and you think more about what you didn't do or more what you regret than what you did do or what you're proud of. just very, very human. You know, if David Lynch had no proclivity to make the most unsettling, baffling, confounding movies ever made, he could have had a great career in just telling little human stories like this. Inland Empire, this was the only other Lynch film I hadn't seen, and this is the opposite of The Straight Story. This might be the Lynchiest, or one of the Lynchiest films he ever did. It's 3 hours long. It starts off with a relatively easy to follow plot about this sort of washed up actress who gets a role in a movie, and it's going to be her big comeback, but she can't distinguish reality from the script of the movie, and you know, she'll think she's living her life, and then suddenly the director will call cut and she'll realize she was in a scene from the film, and I found that very intriguing. You know, that was a cool story. And then like halfway through, it just goes way off the deep end and becomes a stream of consciousness that is just completely incoherent and is mesmerizing. I mean, it had me hooked for the whole 3 hours, although by the end of it I was like, when's this gonna fucking end? But I didn't really have any clue what was going on. But that's the case with a lot of Lynch films, and it's not, you know, that's not always a bad thing. If it's making you think and it's making you feel, you know, it's doing its job. And Laura Dern was incredible in it. I thought it was interesting that he was, you know, where a lot of directors like Tarantino reject digital film and digital film production and digital video and hold on to this and hold on to the old-fashioned methods of film and film projection, which is great and has its own aesthetic that's great. Other like old-school directors like David Lynch or like Martin Scorsese have embraced digital, been like, well, instead of lamenting the death of film, you know, let's think about what does digital have to offer that film doesn't. And so Scorsese's done stuff with CGI and with 3D, and Lynch with this movie, I think he shot it on like a little mini DV camera, and like when he's filming in the dark, there's a lot of noise in the image, or it gets like, you know, grainy, but like digitally grainy if he zooms in, like weighs in on a close-up of an actor's face. And you know, he mixed in some animation, and he has television. It switches in and out of a character watching television to what they're watching on television to now, you know, he basically just used this movie as a 3-hour experiment in digital filmmaking. Inside Llewyn Davis. This is the Coen brothers movie about the folk scene in the 60s. It's like a week in the life of, you know, this sort of folk singer who had one album with his partner, and his partner has since took his own life, and now he's got to try and break out in a solo career, and the grief is weighing on him, and you know, it's just a character study. There's not much of a plot apart from the plot of every night he needs to find a friend's couch to sleep on, or he needs to, you know, he's trying to get as many gigs as possible, or he's trying to get a record deal, or, you know, just a starving artist trying to make it. And I was compelled to watch it because watching A Complete Unknown reminded me of this film. And, you know, this one isn't just based on Bob Dylan, it's based on a bunch of folk artists from that time, and all the characters are fictional, but it captures that time perfectly. I think even the writer of the book that A Complete Unknown is based on was a consultant on this. And it just captures the atmosphere perfectly. You know, Oscar Isaac plays Llewyn Davis. He'll go down to the Gaslight and do an acoustic set, and it captures that atmosphere as well as A Complete Unknown did. I think they'd make a great double bill. Better Call Saul. After I finished Breaking Bad, I started Better Call Saul, and I'm still not quite sure what the best order would be. Is it, you know, would it be better to watch Better Call Saul before Breaking Bad, or because the majority of Better Call Saul takes place before Breaking Bad, and it would give you so much more context to watch this one first. It would give you so much more context on Saul's story in Breaking Bad, and also Gus's story and Mike's story, and even smaller characters like Tuco and Hector and Don Eladio and these kinds of characters, Juan Bolsa. But towards the end of Better Call Saul, it goes way beyond Breaking Bad, and it's looking back on Breaking Bad. So maybe that's what you're supposed to do. Watch the first 5.5 seasons of Better Call Saul, then watch all of Breaking Bad, then go back and watch the last few episodes of Better Call Saul. I don't know. But rewatching Saul, it coincided with Alan Sepinwall, one of the most renowned TV critics in America, has written a book about Better Call Saul called Saul Goodman versus Jimmy McGill, like an episode-by-episode companion piece. And I was offered a review copy. It's the first time that's ever happened for me to do some coverage on it and get them some publicity. I mean, I've seen tons of articles about it, so they must be handing these review copies out like candy. I mean, if I'm on the list, they've handed them out to hundreds of people before they got to me. But it was cool. It's the first time I've ever gotten a review copy of a book. But Better Call Saul is so much better than it had any right to be. Like, when they announced that they were doing a spin-off of Breaking Bad about Walter White's lawyer, it seemed like this is Joey all over again. And to be fair, in its first season, there's some great stuff in the first season, and it lays a lot of the groundwork that's necessary for some of the payoffs later on, like Jimmy's relationship with Chuck and his relationship with Kim. But it takes a little while to sort of figure out its tone, because it starts off, it eventually would just have the same tone as Breaking Bad, where it's like, you know, really intense, character-focused drama with also a very healthy dose of dark humor. But it starts off much more comedic and much lighter than Breaking Bad. And much slower as well. There's much less action. Like, the whole first season is dedicated to the Sandpiper Crossing case, where it's just, you know, the residents of a retirement home are being defrauded. And I love seeing any scenario where Jimmy uses, you know, legal loopholes and things, like where he's at Sandpiper and they're trying to kick him out, and he writes a letter of whatever, whether you announce that, you know, I'm an attorney, I'm going to investigate this. And he writes it on toilet paper just to force them to stop shredding documents, because he can hear them in the background shredding documents. But it starts off much slower and much less assured in its tone than Breaking Bad did. So it starts off not quite as great as Breaking Bad. And I feel like that's, like, I speak to a lot of people who have seen the first few episodes and couldn't really get into it and gave up on it. But you really have to stick with it, because by about season 3, it's as great, or maybe even greater than Breaking Bad, and it just keeps getting better until the end. So it's interesting to revisit it. Now it's fresh in my mind. It'll be fun to read the book and, you know, get a second opinion. Frances Ha. It was one of my absolute favorite films. I have a big poster of it up in my living room, and it's, if I did a Letterboxd top 4, this would be in it. I did a video about it as well, actually, a couple of years ago. I just adore it. It so perfectly captures, you know, being in your mid-20s, trying to figure your shit out and get your life together, and I relate so much to Greta Gerwig's sort of on-screen persona, because I too am very awkward and you know, in this movie in particular, she's very lonely and, you know, bouncing from apartment to apartment and making really close friends, but then she has to move out, or something happens, they move out, or she's, you know, she makes these really deep connections, but then it ultimately ends up alone. And the pacing is amazing, because it, you know, Noah Baumbach uses jump cuts where he never stays on any one scene for more than 30 seconds, but it feels like they all have plenty of room to breathe, because you're just getting snippets of a much larger, you know, he'll show a party scene in 2 minutes, but you'll feel like you've been at that party for 4 hours, because you saw 8 different conversations and you were in 8 different parts of the room. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's fantastic, and it should be required viewing for every aimless 20-something trying to figure their shit out. Fargo, another Coen brothers joint. I fucking love Fargo. I mean, I love anything that plays with crime tropes, but also has a lot of dark humor and subverts what you would usually see in a classic crime film. And Marge Gunderson, Frances McDormand's character, I think she's like the greatest cop character in the history of cinema, because she plays by the rules. She just does good, honest police work, you know? You know, you see a lot of characters like Dirty Harry or Martin Riggs who don't play by the rules and, you know, break the law to enforce it. And I love those characters too, but you see them, they're 10 a penny. You've seen them a million times. You know, it's refreshing to see Marge, who's just a regular person. She's pregnant. She loves her husband. She's really supportive of him in an art competition. Like, you never see that the cop is just as interested in the spouse's mundane things than their own, like, high-stakes murder investigation. But, you know, Marge doesn't use excessive force. She just uses her intuition, and she, you know, asks questions and speaks to people she's suspicious of and kind of, like, follows every clue. And even when she catches the bad guy stuffing a corpse into a wood chipper, she doesn't, like, blow his head off and go, it's just been revoked. You know, she shoots him in the leg when he tries to run, and then she takes him back to the car, and she drives him back to the station, and she books him and arrests him. And it's just another day at the office. Then she goes home, and she snuggles up to her husband, and she congratulates him on getting his painting on one of the stamps, and it's so refreshing. I love it so much. Inglourious Basterds. This is one of Tarantino's absolute best movies. It's, you know, now he's expected that he's gonna upend history and change the facts and, you know, have a more just outcome than what really happened. He's gonna have a slave beat the slavers. He's gonna have, you know, a badass stuntman who's gonna kick the shit out of the Manson people before they can get to Sharon Tate. And, but when he made Inglourious Basterds, no one knew he was gonna do that. And it was such a delightful surprise that he killed Hitler and all his brass. You know, Hitler in real life got to go out on his own terms like a coward. He didn't have to face the music. But in Inglourious Basterds, he faces the hell out of the music, and he gets his face blown off by Jewish soldiers, while another Jewish woman burns down her theater and kills all his other guys, has them burned alive. And it just felt great to watch a movie where, you know, Nazis are the bad guys, and they get killed ruthlessly and repeatedly in horrific and gruesome ways. Gee, I don't know why that felt so good right now, to see a movie where Nazis get their comeuppance. I can't quite place my finger on it, but it felt good. And it was also, after watching Better Call Saul, it was interesting to see Werner Ziegler is in Inglourious Basterds. He's one of, like, Hitler's right-hand guys who he's complaining to when he first hears about the bastards. So that was nice. If I hadn't have been rewatching Better Call Saul at the time, I probably wouldn't have even recognized him. Annie Hall. I was doing my, I did a list of the best romantic comedies for Valentine's Day. It performed quite well. And number one is Annie Hall, and it kind of making that video remind me how much I love it, and I hadn't seen it in a few months. And it's just a masterpiece. It's one you have to kind of separate the artist from their art, as they say, because Woody Allen, and that is kind of hard to overlook. But it just captures the foibles of dating so perfectly. I mean, I went into this in the rom-com videos. If you want to check it out, go check it out. But most rom-coms follow a formula, and it's the version of love that they peddle is just this bullshit made-up version, and it's too clean. And in Annie Hall, it's much messier, and that's life. Life is messy. They break up, they get back together, they see other people. It's all over the place. It's non-linear. It's just it captures real life, what the real life dating is like, and real life romance and relationships are like, much better than 99% of other rom-coms. The Brutalist. I went out to watch The Brutalist. Damn near took up the entire day, because it's a fucking long movie. Holy shit, is this long? It's like 3.5 fucking hours long, and there's a 15-minute intermission in the middle, which actually I was very grateful for, because gave me a chance to stretch my legs, go for a whiz. But it was like binge watching a mini-series in the cinema. And I don't know if it really justified its length, because it didn't feel like airtight. But having said that, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a fantastic movie. I couldn't believe how well Brady Corbet immerses you in the past, for the money he made it on. He made it for like less than $10 million. And yet it looked 10 times better than most $200 million movies. Somehow every single shot of a street had period-accurate cars, and all the extras were wearing period-accurate costumes, and even if it was just an establishing shot for 2 seconds in a 3.5-hour movie, it looked amazing, and the acting was absolutely incredible. Adrien Brody, he was like the reason it sustains for 3.5 hours, because he's endlessly watchable, and he's incredible in this character, and he has that thing that like Robert De Niro has, where he makes you feel what he's feeling. He feels it so realistically and so immersively that you feel it too. Like when he's at the train station and he's really, really excited to see his wife, who we haven't seen in years because they've been separated. I was like crying with joy for him, because he made me, it was so believable that he's so happy to see his wife after all this time. And Guy Pearce I thought was amazing. He's like, I've been a champion of Kieran Culkin for Best Supporting Actor because I loved him in A Real Pain. But I wouldn't really object at all if Guy Pearce won, because he was phenomenal in this. And really, really captured that like shit-eating fucking rich guy who wants to be seen as very powerful and very, very brilliant, but really is just, he came from money and now he continues to have money. There's nothing special about him at all. And his son, played by, I believe, Joe Alwyn, was incredible as well, of like the son who wants to be like his dad and wants to make his dad proud by basically just copying him and acting like him and being every bit the pompous tit he is, And Felicity Jones I thought was great as Adrien Brody's wife, and it's the Holocaust story that doesn't really get told. Every Holocaust movie is about the Holocaust itself, whereas in this movie you never see the inside of a camp. It begins as he arrives in New York after the war is over and he's been liberated, but the trauma of it, the PTSD, just lingers for the whole rest of the movie. The movie covers like years and years, but the horror of what he endured sticks with him that whole time, and that was also partly why it didn't really feel, it felt long, but it didn't drag, because it covers such a huge time span. It covers years and years and years of his life. And there's a really interesting story in there about capitalism and, art versus commerce. And I thought it was interesting that Brady Corbet has been saying that he didn't make a penny from making The Brutalist, because all the money he would have made from it or pocketed from it, he just put it back into the production budget. Because that's what Laszlo does. He's building this huge building for Guy Pearce, and every time he goes over budget, he just says, take it out on my feet, and he ends up with nothing. Because he's forgone his entire payment to make his art the way he wanted to make his art, and that's what Brady Corbet did with the film. And it was initially I was kind of frustrated that it weaves and meanders and goes on for 3.5 hours, and then at the very end they introduce this huge bombshell, and then there's like a twist and a cliffhanger, and like now you can't wait to wrap it up. Now you can't wait to get to the credits and not explain what the fuck happened after the cliffhanger. But it was obviously very intentional. And I've since come to think, as much as I would have wanted to know what happened next, I would have wanted an explanation, it's better that we didn't, and we get to kind of make up our own minds and think about the possibilities, and I'm trying really hard not to spoil what it is. There's a big unanswered question at the end, and But I've spent so much time thinking about that question, it probably would have been a letdown if that question had been definitively answered, because it's been really interesting to ponder. Legend. This is the fantasy film directed by, I think, Ridley Scott, possibly Tony Scott. I think it was Ridley Scott, with Tom Cruise and Sloane from Ferris Bueller, and Tim Curry as like the devil. I like Tim Curry as the devil, but other than that, this was a load of old toss. I honestly thought it was complete shit. I almost turned it off a couple of times because I just wasn't into it at all. I didn't enjoy it one iota, apart from Tim Curry's performance. El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. I felt after I finished Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, kind of felt like I hadn't quite ticked the box if I didn't also watch El Camino. I also was intrigued to rewatch it. I've seen this movie probably twice now, or now 3 times. And I guess it's not completely necessary. I mean, what happens in the movie is basically what had been theorized to have happened. Like, people wanted to think, people had been worried, well, Jesse got away in Todd's car, but the car is registered to Todd, they'll probably track the car down, or the police are already on their way. Like, police come walking in after Walter White dies, and that was right after Jesse had left, so maybe the police intercepted Jesse on his way out. But then people like to think, because of the whole Alaska thing that Jesse had, his dream was to just run away and go to Alaska and start a new life. People have theorized maybe he did that. Maybe that would be the perfect ending for him. And so Vince Gilligan basically just took all those theories and made them the script for this movie. That yes, Jesse left, and yes, the police came, but he managed to avoid them, but now there's a massive manhunt for him, and the car has load jacks, so they're going to find the car, so he has to get a new car, and he has to scrape them, and then the whole film becomes he has to get the money together to pay Ed Galbraith to relocate him to Alaska and give him a new identity. So it was somewhat predictable, and it was somewhat unnecessary, but I really enjoy it. I think Aaron Paul's performance is incredible. He like slips effortlessly back into the role of Jesse and really captures like the PTSD, because at this point Jesse's been a slave for like months and months, and Aaron Paul really captured the trauma of that perfectly, while still being, at his heart, he's still Jesse. He's still fierce and lovable and kind and a good person who has been mixed in with a bad crowd, and it got to show us, because the end of Breaking Bad is focused so much on Walt and giving him a final moment with Skyler and with Walt Jr. and with Jesse, and so El Camino is like, let's give Jesse his last moments with Badger and Skinny Pete, and with dotted throughout the film there's flashbacks to Jesse, scenes with Jesse and all the most important people in his life. Like, there's a scene with Walt, there's a scene with Mike, and there's a scene with Jane. And having just seen Breaking Bad, I was able to like place where all those things were on the timeline, which I didn't have when the film came out. I couldn't quite place, like, where is this point that he's talking to Mike, or what point is this that he's talking to Jane or Walt, But there's a great little postscript to the series. It was like having a nice little bonus episode of Breaking Bad. Tropic Thunder. Rewatched Tropic Thunder. I think Tropic Thunder is a comedy classic on par with Airplane and The Naked Gun and the Monty Python films, because it's just a masterpiece. It's so funny. The cast are so funny and the characters are so funny, and like, Kirk Lazarus and Les Grossman, and it's got this really great underlying satire where it's like draws parallels between the unscrupulous, underhanded methods of Hollywood producers and talent agencies and the unscrupulous, underhanded techniques of like international drug smuggling rings, and that's encapsulated so perfectly with Les Grossman's showdown with the guys at Golden Dragon. And it basically is like, what's the difference between like David Zaslav and El Chapo? They're just as ruthless as each other, they're just in different industries, and one is more legitimate than the other. And so, I mean, obviously it's a little controversial for its use of blackface, and it's making fun of people with intellectual disabilities. But the blackface stuff, it's making fun of method acting. It's not just racism. And, the Simple Jack stuff, that's making fun of actors who play a character with an intellectual disability to win an Oscar. So in both cases, the target of the joke isn't, an oppressed minority group. It's self-important, idiot Hollywood people. Captain America: Brave New World. I did a review of this, so I don't need to go too much into it, but, pretty naff. I didn't love it. I wanted to like it. Every time I go into a new Marvel film, I want to like it. And a lot of the time I do. But this was just one of the just shitty, it was a classic casualty of them saying, all right, in this quarter of this year, we're going to release a Captain America movie to sort of establish that Sam Wilson is Captain America ahead of the next Avengers film. And then saying, okay, filmmakers, come up with a Captain America movie about this character. Like putting the cart before the horse. Like, don't just come up with stories that are worth telling and tell those stories. Don't say we need this marquee in this month. Meet that release date, please. Because it just yields mediocre, formulaic, derivative shite. And that's what this is. extras. After I finished The Office, BBC iPlayer said, hey, how about extras? And extras is another show I've seen a million times, but I haven't seen in a couple of years. And I love it. I mean, it's maybe not quite as masterfully crafted or groundbreaking as The Office, but it's still hilarious. It's, you know, Ricky Gervais and Ashley Jensen have really great chemistry, and they're really funny in their roles, where he's like the curmudgeonly everyman, and she's kind of like the ditzy airhead, and they're constantly getting into embarrassing situations. And I really like the conceit that they're extras on movie sets. They're like the invisible, faceless background people on a movie set. And every episode there will be a huge star like Ben Stiller or Samuel L. Jackson or David Bowie or Kate Winslet, and they will get into some horribly humiliating situation with them. And then later on, like, that's how it starts off. But it didn't stay confined to that formula. Like, once Rick Gervais's character Andy Millman starts getting famous, because he gets his own TV show and he becomes a big star, then it kind of becomes this commentary on fame and the absurdity of fame, and how once you're famous, you'll never be famous enough. And, you know, the character kind of turns into a monster, and even though he was once a nobody extra who relied on the kindness of Patrick Stewart to get his foot in the door, now that he's the famous guy, when an extra comes up to him to get his foot in the door, he you know, has him fired. And it's like this classic, you know, pull the ladder up behind you kind of thing. That, you know, was really interesting. And it was another case, 2 seasons and a Christmas special, and they're out. And so they didn't have enough time for it to go downhill. They didn't do 200 episodes in the last 50 or shit, you know? And Stephen Merchant has a bigger role in this. He was in The Office, I think, 1 or 2 episodes. But in this, he's one of the main guys. He plays Andy's agent, who's completely hopeless. And he's hilarious. Missing. I watched Searching when it came out and really enjoyed it, where it's like, you know, about this father played by John Cho is on this quest to find his daughter who's gone missing, and it's all shown through screens. It's shown through his laptop screen, his phone screen, and, you know, if he drives somewhere, it's the sat-nav screen on his car. Really, like, interesting modern way of telling a story. And this Missing is, you know, kind of a sequel, but not. It's the different characters, but the same sort of thing, but now it's the opposite. It's the daughter is trying to find her missing mom, and she's played by Storm Reid from Euphoria and The Last of Us. Just incredible actor, and she's incredible in this, where her mom goes on holiday with her new boyfriend, and she's supposed to go and pick her up at the airport, and she never comes back. The flight lands. It's the flight she was supposed to be on, but she's not on it, and she can't get in touch with her. She can't reach her by phone, and so she starts investigating. She speaks to the embassy, she speaks to the hotel that her mom's in, and she like hires a local guy to go and try and get the footage, the CCTV footage, and I fucking loved it. I mean, the way it all shakes out is a little bit contrived, you know, where it's a couple of things that maybe don't make sense or are a little bit ridiculous, but on the whole, it was really gripping. Like, I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. Every 5 minutes, there's a new bombshell revelation that changes the whole case, and, you know, there's red herrings that they have you convinced this has got something to do with it, and it turns out that's nothing to do with it, or it is to do with it, but it's not in the way you thought. Or just a really, really well-constructed mystery, and it's maybe not isn't 100% realistic, but if you just get swept up in it and go along with it, it's a really, really fun little thriller. And Storm Reid is fantastic in it as this just regular kid who steps up and is very intuitive and inquisitive and becomes a great detective just because she loves her mom so much and wants to get her mom back. Will do whatever it takes to figure out what happened to her, and that part's not contrived. Like some of the plot twists are a little contrived, but her transformation from just regular kid to great detective feels completely organic, and I feel like that's partly Storm Reid's performance is just totally believable. Captain America: Brave New World. I went to watch this the second time because my sister hadn't seen it, and it doesn't get any better on the second viewing. If anything, it gets worse. The reshoots stand out more. The fact that it was reshot to hell, and it clearly was a very different movie when they started filming it than when they finished. And, you know, like Ruth, the character of Ruth, the ex-Black Widow, in one scene she's just randomly wearing a super suit that you never see again. So clearly she was supposed to suit up and become like part of the superhero team, but it all got cut out. And there's just shit like that all over the film. And, you know, my sister had been out drinking the night before. She'd been out to town with her friends, so she was pretty hungover watching this movie with me. And I had told her before it started, like, the end credit scene really isn't worth sticking around for, because it basically is just, you know, the shocking revelation that the Marvel Universe is a multiverse, and there are alternate universes. Except they've been beating us over the head with that for the last 5 years, so it's a surprise to no one. So I basically said, if you just want to leave after the film, we can leave. But if you want to stick around for the scene, I'll stick around for the scene. And so when it was over, I said, like, do you want to stick around for the post-credit scene? And she just turned to me and went, no, that was crap. Like, I thought it was, like, pretty naff, but she thought it was an absolute piece of shit. But there's just so much of it, and I can't really even be asked getting into it, but there's just so many bullshit things that don't make sense, you know? Like where with Missing, it was ever so slightly contrived from certain twists and turns. Captain America Brave New World has shit that just doesn't make sense at all. Lilo and Stitch. I hadn't seen Lilo and Stitch in years. You know, when I was a kid, I probably watched it 100 times. I adored it, but I hadn't seen it in a long time. And it popped up in recommended on Disney Plus. I was like, you know, I haven't seen that in a while. I'll stick it on. And I've forgotten just how absolutely delightful it is. I mean, it's, you know, I remembered really liking it, but it's a really, really fantastic film. I absolutely love those two characters of Lilo and Stitch. Like they're like Elliot and E.T. if they both had a sadistic streak, you know? Like that's what they bond over. Like it's the same sort of story where this lonely, troubled kid finds a kindred spirit and a best friend with this alien who has landed. But where E.T. and Elliot are like just the purest, kindest souls, Lilo and Stitch are both kind of violent. Like Lilo gets into fights and gets in trouble, and the social workers want to take her away from her sister, and Stitch is like this monstrosity that was illegally created in a lab. But once Lilo adopts Stitch, they love each other. And there were so many things in it that I'd totally forgotten about. Like that Lilo living in Hawaii, Lilo's a huge Elvis fan, and she finds out she can use Stitch as a record player, where she puts his nail on the record as a needle and opens his mouth, and his mouth is playing Suspicious Minds.
We can go on together with suspicious minds. Can build our dreams.
Such a great little movie, and you know, such lovable characters. Cowboy Bebop. Finally finished Cowboy Bebop after about 3 or 4 months because I was rationing them out because there's only like 26 episodes, and once I got through them, it was over. I didn't want to rush through them. I wanted to ration them out. But finally got to the end, and what I kind of always thought was it was one season and then got cancelled or something. But it seems like they just told a 26 episode story. That was all they wanted to do, because the ending is an ending. It's a proper ending. It goes back to what the main mystery was in episode 1, and has kind of like occasionally come back over the course of the series, and has a definitive, climactic, emotional conclusion to that whole story. And it was amazing, you know? And I'm really sad I'm never going to see you Space Cowboy on the screen again. But, you know, I can always go back and rewatch, and I may very well do that. Renfield. I missed this one when it came out, and it's, you know, Nicholas Hoult plays the assistant to Count Dracula, and Nicolas Cage is Dracula, and Renfield's going to a support group for people who are in toxic, codependent relationships, and, you know, that was a really funny comedic premise, to treat Dracula and Renfield as, like, a toxic couple, and Renfield is trying to, like, break out of the cycle of abuse and manipulation. And it's honestly a really fun movie, you know? Nicholas Hoult is great at playing the absurdity totally straight, and Nicolas Cage is clearly having so much fun playing Dracula, and it's got a lot of great like action scenes, but there's some really, really grating exposition. That was the only thing that stood out to me and really like drove me up the wall, because Awkwafina's in it as this cop who Renfield falls in love with. And I love Awkwafina. I think she's hilarious, and she was great in this. But the way they explain her character and her character's backstory is so absurdly on the nose. Like, one of her, you know, the chief comes up to her and is like, you know, hey, look, I promised I was going to look after you after your dad died. And it's like, she knows that. You don't need to, you're telling that to the audience. You're not telling that to her. And she's talking to her sister. Her sister is like, you know, I want revenge against those gangsters who killed dad just as much as you do. And it's like, come on. That's like screenwriting 101. Bury the exposition. Don't make the exposition so absurdly in your face. But other than that, I did really enjoy the film. The White Lotus Season 3. White Lotus has just come back for Season 3. And it's just as great as ever. I mean, there's so many great new characters. I don't know how Mike White does it. Like, he's exploring the same section of society in every season, where it's like the weirdos and the arseholes of the 1%, and he comes up with like 15 new major characters every season, and none of them ever feel like a rehash of any other. You know, they all are completely distinctively their own characters, their own personalities, their own flaws. There's no overlap, even though they're all essentially the same character because they're all rich and on holiday. They're all completely different, you know? And this is a great new cast. Walton Goggins and Amy Lou Wood have a really funny dynamic where she's his much younger girlfriend, and he just, like, as much as he enjoys having a young, sexy, beautiful girlfriend, he, like, looks so pissed pissed off every time she opens her mouth, and he is just so miserable. And Jason Isaacs and Parker Posey as this rich couple, and their kids, like Patrick Schwarzenegger plays the one of the kids, and he's what I've learned the term Jim Cell just from people describing his character, where he's, you know, he's very attractive and he talks to every woman he meets and tries to flirt with her, but he's just, even though he's attractive, his personality is so off-putting, he's so unsuccessful. And there's this weird sexual tension between these three siblings that's like really, really disturbing, but really interesting as well, because you want to see where did that come from and where's it going. And Michelle Monaghan and Leslie Bibb and Carrie Coon as these three, you know, that's like this interesting look at like the toxicity of female friendship, where it's like, you know, and I love like heartwarming stories of like positive, non-toxic female friendship, whether it's in Broad City or Frances Ha, another great example. But in White Lotus, these three characters, it's the dark side, where they're constantly one-upping each other with compliments, like, oh, you look so amazing, no, you look so amazing, no, you look so much better than me, no, you look better than me. And, you know, because it's like this passive-aggressive one-upmanship. I mean, it's only just started, but I'm really interested to see where this season goes. It's gotten off to a really great start. Yellowjackets season 3. There's another one's back for season 3. And it's another one that's still great. I mean, some of the pacing is starting to feel a bit uneven as it keeps cutting back and forth between the past and the present. And sometimes what's happening in the present is pretty slow and dull, and what's happening in the past is really intense and exhilarating, or vice versa. And so every time you cut away, it kind of like kills the momentum. But it's just an absolutely incredible cast. Two incredible casts. You've got the young cast and the older cast, and they were both filled with great actors giving great performances and bringing these characters to life. And you know, and there's another one, it only just started, so I can't really speculate on where the season's going or how it will, as a whole, how it will all come together. But it's like White Lotus, there's another one that's got off to a great start. Kinda Pregnant. I don't really know why I watched this, because I didn't like the sound of the premise. The premise sounded a bit absurd. The premise sounded like, sorry to keep using this word, but contrived, because it's Amy Schumer pretends to be pregnant because she's jealous of her friend's pregnancy. And it's like, where's that going? I mean, at a certain point, you're not going to have a baby, so how long do you think you're going to keep that up? And who would even do that? But I guess I wanted to watch it because I was like, well, how are they even going to make a story out of that premise? And it makes a bit more sense in the film than it does in the Netflix logline, because she doesn't actually pretend to be pregnant in front of her friend. She only pretends to be pregnant around this new woman she's met. She goes to a Lamaze class or whatever, or pregnant yoga with a fake baby bump, and incidentally makes a friend, and it kind of just builds from there. And I'll be honest, I actually like Amy Schumer. I mean, I know she's been caught red-handed stealing jokes, but I think maybe that might be, I don't think she intentionally did. I think she's watched a lot of stand-up, and a line popped into her head, and she thought, that's mine now. Because when I did stand-up, that happened to me once. I thought of a line and thought, that's a perfect punchline. And then, luckily for me, like right before as I was like getting on a bus to go to Manchester and perform it, it occurred to me like, wait, did I come up with that? And I googled the line and it turned out it was a Bill Hicks punchline. So I was able to avoid doing it. But I very almost unintentionally stole a gag. But I really liked Amy Schumer's sketch show Inside Amy Schumer. I thought it was really funny. And I've liked a lot of her stand-up, especially the early stuff when she would use a lot of like shock value, you know. So most people who will watch Kinda Pregnant are probably hate watching it because they really dislike Amy Schumer. But I wasn't hate watching it. I wanted to like it, but it just isn't that good. It's there's only really a couple of big laughs. And it felt like in every scene they were writing something and they were like, oh, this scene isn't funny enough. We'll have Amy Schumer fall over and that'll make it hilarious. But it just, it was never really funny. Lizzie Broadway from Gen V is in this, and she is hilarious in it. She's like deserving of being in a much funnier movie because she's the funniest part of it. And the ending was hilarious. I won't spoil what happens, but the ending actually got a big laugh out of me because they have this big romantic reunion with Amy Schumer and her love interest, Will Forte, and they, it's this predictable thing where they get together and they ride off into the sunset. And then immediately after that, it totally subverts the romance of the moment and does like some crazy comedic slapstick stuff that actually I thought was really funny and really worked. But yeah, other than that, I don't really recommend this. I recommend going on Netflix and skip to the very end, skip to the final 5 minutes, and watch the ending of every rom-com where the guy comes back and forgives the girl and they get together and ride off, and then something crazy happens. Just watch the ending. Grave of the Fireflies. I'd always kind of avoided this movie because everyone says it's brilliant, but it's also like one of the saddest movies they've ever seen, and that it's a masterpiece, but they would only ever watch it once, and so I was scared. I didn't want to be that sad, so I just avoided it. But I was like, I need to watch this because it's going to be great. So I just bit the bullet and watched it, and it is a fucking masterpiece. masterpiece, and it is one of the fucking saddest movies ever made. I wept uncontrollably. You know, it starts out like the first 20 minutes. It's about these kids in Japan, this brother and sister, an older brother and a little sister, who are living in war-torn Japan, and every day, or every other day, there's an air raid, and they have to go and hide in a bomb shelter. And one day, their mom doesn't make it to the bomb shelter, and she is killed, and they're orphaned, and so they have to make it on their own. They live with their auntie, who's really cruel, and when they can't put up with that anymore, they go and move into a bomb shelter. But after they've traded away all their mom's precious kimonos from precious materials to get food from farmers, they can't get food anymore, so they have to resort to stealing, and it just, their lives get bleaker and bleaker and bleaker. And in the first 20 minutes, the mom died, and it was very sad, and the brother hides it from his sister for as long as possible, but the sister eventually hears about it, and we're also going okay, this is sad. I don't know if it's the saddest movie ever made, sad, but it's sad. Naively thinking, I'm gonna get through this whole movie without shedding a tear. And then, but that's the thing, you can't just start off sad, you can't just start off in misery. You have to give us time to get to know these characters and come to love these kids, and then start having sadder and sadder and more horrible things happen to them. And that's what happens, it just gets bleaker and bleaker and bleaker, and you know, the longer you've spent with these kids, the more you love them, and the more horrible things are happening to them. And, you know, I don't want to spoil how it all shakes out, but I was just crying my eyes out for the last, half an hour of the film. It's absolutely devastating. One of the greatest war films I've ever seen, one of the greatest animated films I've ever seen. An absolute masterpiece. And those characters of Sato and Setsuko, especially Setsuko, because Sato's old enough to be a bit jaded and a bit cynical, and he sees the world for how cruel it really is. But Setsuko is just a little kid, and she's so innocent, and to see the horrors of humanity, the horrors of warfare through her eyes is especially heartbreaking, you know, because she just wants to have fun, she just wants to live her life, and even if they go and spend the day at the beach, which is all she wants to do, is go back to the beach and have fun on the beach, she finds a dead body, and it's everything is tainted, everything she finds happiness and joy in is tainted, you know. And the title of the film is she loves coming out at night and seeing the fireflies. And then the next morning, all the fireflies are dead. And she's just devastated. Why did the fireflies have to die so soon? It's just absolutely heartbreaking. And there's always this slight glimmer of hope. And I feel that's what the fireflies symbolize, is the tiny little glow of hope amidst all the darkness and the horror. But as someone who has a little sister, this fucking movie destroyed me. The Monkey, just watched this. Osgood Perkins, director of Longlegs, adapting the short story of the same name by Stephen King. I loved it. I won't go too deep into it because I did a review video of it, so you can watch the video. But I had a blast at this movie. I thought it was a ton of fun. The kill scenes are some of the most creative I've ever seen, and I was laughing out loud through the whole thing. And my audience, my kind of opening night audience, seemed to be split between people who shared the same fucked up humor of King and Perkins and myself, and we were laughing through all the gory, gruesome death. And the other half didn't find it funny at all and were disgusted by it. But I was in the camp of, this is a hell of a lot of fun. And it's, in the vein of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead films or Peter Jackson's, splatter movies, like Brain Dead and stuff like that. And but also has a lot to say about death and about dealing with loss and about everyone feels their loss and their grief is unique to them, but ultimately it's something everyone deals with, and that's something Perkins learned the hard way, because both of his parents died when he was very young in horrific ways. Not quite as horrific as getting bitten by a cobra on a golf course, or having their head lit on fire and running headfirst into a real estate sign, but he knows all too well the Shelbourne family curse from this movie, and I think that kind of personal touch really went a long way. It's not just a fun splatterfest, although it is that, and it's great as that. It's a movie about death and about dealing with death, and, I thought it was fantastic. I loved it. I've seen some divided reactions to it, but I adored it. I had a great time. The Sopranos. Finished Breaking Bad, finished Better Call Saul. Now I'm kind of doing a greatest hits tour of all the best TV shows ever made, because The Sopranos is maybe the best TV show I've ever seen outside the Breaking Bad universe. But it's probably been 10 years since I watched it, and I never revisited it, so I'm going back, and I only just started it. I'm only on episode 5. I'm actually on the college one, the one where Tony has taken Meadow around all the colleges, and he sees one of his old enemies who's in witness protection. The first truly great, truly legendary episode of the show. It was great from the very beginning, but that was the episode where it was this is something truly, truly special and unique. And I just love it. I love this quirky portrayal of the mob, where it's Stylistically, it borrows more from Goodfellas, where it's like the storytelling is a bit messier and the violence is messier, and the characters are like mid-level. They're not like top of the pile like Don Corleone. They're sort of they still have to do the dirty work kind of thing, like Henry Hill and Jimmy the Gent and Tommy DeVito and those guys. But it also, what it takes from The Godfather is, when Francis Ford Coppola made The Godfather, when he read Mario Puzo's book, he couldn't really find a way into it. He thought, like, it's just lurid, violent, gangster stuff. And he couldn't find a personal connection to the mafia stuff. But then he read it again, he read it as a story about an Italian-American immigrant family. And that he could relate to. And so he focused less on the inner workings of the mafia and more on the relationship of father and son and siblings and, the golden child and the prodigal son and all these different things that, like, not everyone can relate to the mafia, but everyone can relate to a family, And that's what The Sopranos is. It's not everyone's dad is in quote-unquote waste management, but everyone can relate to Tony and Carmela and AJ and Meadow and their whole dynamic, because they're just, apart from the attachment to the mafia, they're just a regular family. And the show focuses as much on the family dynamics as it does on the mafia. So I'm re-hooked. The Sopranos has hooked me again, and I can't wait to keep going. But yeah, as I say, I'm only on like episode 5, so I'll have more to say on The Sopranos next month, which will be March. And I'll speak to you then. Let me know if you've got any recommendations for any films or TV shows you've been watching, or if there's any shitty ones you've watched that I should be avoiding, like Kinda Pregnant, or Captain America Brave New World, or Legend. And I'll speak to you at the end of March. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe and click on the little bell. And also seize the day and call your mom and be kind to yourself.